Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series, Smarter Together. Today's webinar is the fourth in this new series hosted by Georgia Tech's Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation team. My name is Greg McCormick, and I'm the director of the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, a grant program offered through the Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation Group. This grant is available to local governments in Georgia and provides funding, as well as a partnership with a Georgia Tech researcher to execute a year-long pilot study or pilot program of smart community technology. Interested communities should visit our website or email us. Both are available for your reference in the chat area. Before we get started with today's webinar, a few housekeeping reminders. Please keep your audio and video muted throughout the presentation in order to limit interruptions. Please utilize the chat area to submit your questions, and you can do so at any time. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar and will make the recording as well as the slides available on our website for your reference. They're available in the media area of the events tab, and that link is also available in the chat area. So again, welcome to the Smarter Together webinar series. And now I'd like to welcome Deborah Lamb, Managing Director of Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation, to introduce today's presenter. Welcome, Deborah.
Thanks, Greg. Hello, everyone. May I also ask Benoit and Daniel to join us as well and show their screens. We're very excited about this final webinar for the month of May. We started this webinar series at the 1st of May to really try to highlight the most innovative Georgia Tech research and community collaboration partnerships that could really advance to the next stage of city and community development, utilizing technology and data, and obviously the best that we have in collaboration. This particular webinar is also co-sponsored with our Institute of Supply Chain and Logistics that we're thrilled to be partnering with, as well as a number of other organizations at Georgia Tech and our Georgia Smart partners. So the format of this webinar, for those that have joined in the past, is that Professor Benoit will introduce himself and really show us his latest research and thinking around supply chain and logistics. And then we'll invite Daniel to come back and moderate our conversation and discussion. Again, as Greg noted, if you have any particular questions, please type them in on the chat box, and Daniel can kind of facilitate those questions, as well as ask some questions that he has of Benoit. So without further ado, let me just pass this over to Benoit and really welcome him and appreciate his time and expertise to sharing this with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's a pleasure to be with you at noon here. Today I'll be talking about a topic that is dear to our heart right now, and that everybody among us, with knowing or we're facing, which is the link between pandemic and supply chain. So the title of my presentation will be Enabling Together Smarter Pandemic Supply Chain Readiness and Response. So I'll try to make sure that those terms are well identified through the presentation so that it's clear. The work that I'm presenting is a work in process. Okay, it's a teamwork. We're 26 professors from Georgia Tech and associate professors, adjunct professors, sorry, that are joining for this endeavor, which is basically trying to put a statement through a white paper style of basically what is important to learn from what we've lived through in the last months, and basing ourselves on the multiple knowledge from these faculty, we're putting together this work, which will grow into other projects afterward. But now we concentrate on this. So I've put their names on the screen. Okay, I will not name them all, but they're all participating actively to what I'm doing. So I had to do very drastic choices when presenting to you, because this 20-minute talk is very compact. So I apologize at the beginning that I may not, and I will probably not go as deep as you would love on some of specific topics that you are, but feel free, and we can go and do this during the question and answers, or anytime afterward. We'll be doing this very gladly. So basically, regarding pandemic and society overall, they're key players that people recognize that they've always been there, they will always be there, and we recognize them also. They're very, very important. And I've put them like in 4 big threads, okay, which is like all the medical pharmaceutical innovation domain that's going to drive to get the vaccines and the treatments and that's already done, the test, etc. So everything that is supporting attacking the pandemic disease. Then we have all our healthcare, I call it socio-sanitary type of performance here. So basically making sure that we really take care of all those people that are suffering from the disease, who have to be tested, etc. So all this is very, very important. Then we've got political governance, okay, where leaders of the countries, the states, the cities, and so on, even at Georgia Tech, president of our campus, okay, there's a lot of governance involved into making a country, a state, a region go through a pandemic in good ways, okay. And finally, very important is the collective people behavior, okay. So there are some places that people respect rules and understand what's at stake, and other places they don't that much. And all of this has impact on how the pandemic will be spreading. What I want to do though today is put emphasis on one other, the fifth wheel, if you want, through this, okay, which is supply chain performance. So basically, I'm going to try to talk about it in very broad terms and then get into more detail as we proceed. Now, supply chains, there are all kinds of supply chain around the world, okay? Here in this little slide, okay, what I've done is say, let's see, we've got society that has demand, that has needs to be fulfilled. And I've put 5 of them here with my friend Leon, okay? So essentially we have a healthcare supply chain that is providing everything that the hospitals, the health centers, everybody needs to make sure that we can treat the patient correctly. Sustainment supply chain to nourish, drink, and everything that we need to sustain ourselves. Entertainment supply chain for all the movies, everything you're looking at while being sheltered at home, etc. So that's part of it, and everything else that is going on. Mobility supply chain, hospitality supply chain, those are still others in there. So those supply chains are fulfilling demands from society, and doing so, they're doing it by providing goods and services to society. It may be directly to the consumers or to businesses or organizations that serve the customers, and it can get up the supply chain as to the specific positioning. But overall, we treat it as the society. Another very important relationship that's at stake here is that the society is providing the workforce for a supply chain. Now, when we've got like a pandemic, there are a bunch of things that are happening is that we get a bunch of people that are sick, and those people, many of them are working in those supply chains, so they're making the goods and providing the services that society would need. And so those supply chains are deteriorated, they're perturbated a bit. So now we've got to recognize that they will work at a lower pace, at a degraded pace as before. But at the same time, society has new requests, new demands that are very intense and very urgent. So this balance is very tricky to play, and this happens very fast on a planetary level. A pandemic, by definition, okay, is worldwide. It may not be in every single country, but a lot of them in there, and there are impacts that are going on. It's different than like an earthquake that will happen in one place, and they need a lot of help there, but the rest of the world is not subject to it. Now here, the full world is facing it. So this relationship here is very important, and we'll come back discussing some of these aspects later on. So the roles that supply chain, and I'll be talking oftentimes about the world's supply chains. Okay, so essentially the idea is that I can have all the tiny supply chain, but overall they constitute the overall world supply chain. So in a pandemic, we say there are four key roles, okay? And they make up the acronym HELP, okay, which I thought pretty nice. Friend Frederick got that one. But essentially, it's supporting the healthcare efforts to fight the pandemic, so facilitating the people diagnosis, treatment, vaccination, etc. Then there's enhancing economic continuity and recovery capability, because the pandemic itself, okay, will last a number of months, okay, hopefully less than a year, and then we'll get into gradually into recovery toward the new normal. But if we're not careful, this recovery may be very, very tough. But if we're careful, then we can help making sure that it can rebound better. Also very important is that, yes, there are some people that are sick in COVID. The number are hugely important, but there's still a very minor percentage of the overall population. And in all the countries, everybody is suffering from the impacts of COVID right now. And that is related to all their life. They must continue to eat, to drink, to work as best as possible, to entertain, and to have some kind of quality of life. And that is very, very important, and we'll come back to this later on also. And also we need to facilitate all the political measures, okay, for mitigation, including containment, shelter, etc. It's not the supply chain's position to challenge, question those measures. So we basically have to work with the authorities that are in charge of this, and try to make sure that we're making them work as nicely as possible. So through the presentation and discussion afterward, okay, I'll be talking about two terms, okay, that are dear to our hearts, so which are basically readiness and response. We did not invent those terms, obviously, okay. Even I took some on the slide you see. I took some logo or some little image that are not from us, okay, that talk about pandemic readiness and COVID-19 response, etc. We attach it to supply chain. So essentially, supply chain readiness is ensuring that the world supply chain is well poised to effectively, efficiently, equitably, fairly, and persistently respond to the pandemic-induced demands and disruptions whenever a pandemic is to occur in the future. So it's thinking ahead. Okay, it can be even before the pandemic has even been heard that there would be one called COVID-19. So normally we should already try to be ready when this is going to come. And it's also through a pandemic for preparing, getting ready for the following stages. And then we've got the supply chain response, which is basically all the live decisions and actions taken to address the pandemic-induced demands and disruptions, from early pandemic threat signal, okay, so when the first signal that, hey, there could be a pandemic here, okay, to all the way to pandemic recovery. So as to achieve the goals in line with the 4 HELP roles that we mentioned earlier. So constantly, you have to think, okay, that supply chains, they are not just in the present. They always have to be in the future, and preparing the ground to what's coming, and making sure that we're ready to face the music and deliver what's needed, sorry. So in pandemics, I'm gonna simplify a bit, okay? But we're going to say that, in fact, there are 2 types of products, okay, that are very important in pandemics. We call them the criticals and the essentials. Okay? The criticals, those are those are core to fighting the pandemic disease, okay? So we're talking about the mask, all the PPEs, the testing kits, ventilators, everything of that style, okay? And there's some that are very, very critical, and some that are critical but not so much. So you see my coloring, okay, that goes from red to the dark blue, and the big dark blue is all the products and services in the world, okay, that are there. So there are nuances in there. It's not a 0-1 dichotomy here. And then on the other side, we've got the essentials, okay? So those are core to society and economy survival and continuity. So you need proteins every day. You need, let's put it very bluntly, but we need toilet papers, okay? And essentially when the pandemic happens, among the first thing that gets emptied in the shopping centers and supermarkets are those toilet papers. So they may not be sexy, but they're really very important. Okay, so essentially through this we'll be talking about the critical and the essentials. Now we're not telling that the other products we should not do. Okay, that's not the case at all, because there's this gradation, and if we can through the supply chain make sure that all of this is kind of going through the pandemic almost seamlessly, this is big winning. But we'll have to make compromises at time, and there are things we can do and things we cannot do, and they're the products that essentially there's nobody that wants to buy that right now through the pandemic, so we need to be able to exploit capabilities later on. So I'll explain this. But before I go further, there's another component of this slide that is important, because we're not talking just the products themselves. We have to talk about the components that make it and the materials that are the core of it. So, for example, in Europe at one point there was a problem. There was not enough flour, okay, to do all the cooking for the goods, etc. And in fact, what was done is that it was not the wheat that was the issue. It was the packaging that was missing, so the plant could not function. So you have to go back up the chain to make sure that all the pieces, okay, that are feeding the manufacturing or processing of the final product are indeed there. So that's why this goes all the way up the supply chain. Now, let's try to differentiate a bit what's happening with those criticals and essentials. So criticals, essentially when there's not an epidemic in the region, or there's not a wide pandemic, they may be needed, but in much, much lower quantities. Okay, so essentially if you look at the invasive ventilator demand in the US, before March, there was almost no demand. There was some demand, okay, but very little, okay? And suddenly within a month or two, okay, we're climbing that we need 16,000 of these, okay? So, and essentially and that's just in the US, there's the same kind of everywhere. So there's a huge climb, okay? And this climb is way above, okay, oftentimes what we have and what if we've not been thoughtful, okay, there's no preparation for it. So it's kind of hey, how in the world are we going to make this happen? And in fact, we end up having to do without this, and we have people that are going to be much more ill than they should be, and some will be diseased because we're not able to get those in the hospitals and the healthcare centers as should be. So there's a lot of this going on. So there's a lot of demand. Let's put the vaccine, for example, okay? Well, everybody would love to have a vaccine. Well, but the supply chain getting the vaccines there is not there. It's even the innovation chain that is not there. So we need the vaccine to be scientifically elaborated. There's some that are going on right now to be tested correctly, and then once it's tested, it has to be manufactured, it has to be distributed, etc. Now you don't do this in a flick of a finger. Okay, this takes time, a lot of effort by many companies to make this happen. Mask, okay? It's crazy, okay? So we're already end of May, and it's still very tough to get masks, okay? It's the sourcing for masks in the United States, okay, and imagine in many other countries, okay? It's not an easy thing. You've got people trying to make some, craft some at home, okay? There's a batch coming in, but it's really tactical. It's nobody is sure, and we don't know the lead time. We don't know if they're going to provide. Even if they provide it, we're not even sure about the source of these, their quality, their certification. So it's not obvious. So all this demand, okay, so I want you to understand that we go way beyond expectations, and if we've not thought about it before, we're cut our pants down, and now we have as a society or territory to try to make do and find ways to make it happen. I'll come back to that later. Now, essentials, this is very different, okay? So I talked about toilet paper before, okay? It's not because there's a pandemic, okay, that overall people will end up, okay, everybody on the planet needing more toilet paper. Now, there are nuances on this, okay? In America, okay, we have a lot of containment and people stay at home. So what's happening is at home, they buy a lot more, they use a lot more toilet paper than they would do normally because they would be at school, they'd be at work, etc. So there's a lot of increase on that level. And at the same time, on the commercial industrial side, we see a decrease of demand. But overall, the demand is sensibly the same across the thing, but there are big fluctuations. Here, what I've done is created, okay, because the data is very hard to gather, so I just created the data representing what this is all about, okay? So I've got the PPE. You can think of not PPE, an essential, and essentially think about anything you want, milk, whatever. But in this case, what I have on the upper left, okay, I'm going to try with my mouse, yeah. So you see the demand, the consumption is the brown line, okay, that is shaking a little bit on the upper left corner graph, okay, so customers' consumption. It's roughly at 1 million a day in this example. In that peak, okay, so let's say, for example, there are more people at home, so they consume more of this stuff. Somehow, for some reason, it climbs all the way to 150%, okay? But you see the curve is still pretty stable, okay, overall. Then, if we look the graph on the side, okay, in the middle, upper middle, then you see customer demand, okay. Well, customer demand is the scale. I've changed the scale, okay, on this one. This is the only one, but essentially, I see that I'm roughly in the same order. There's some nuances because people are not buying exactly. They don't know exactly the future, the past, etc. So it's mostly the same. But suddenly, you see a huge peak, okay, on day 121 or something like this, okay? In there, it's huge. It's way above the rest. What's happening in that day or this set of days, okay, at that time? Essentially, it's because if we see just before, okay, there was on the lower left, lower right graph, where it's written shortage. And what ended up is that people went like for the supermarket and they didn't find that product, okay? Now, they didn't find it. They know they are in pandemics, and they know that it's essential for them. So what do? Normally, in this example, they kind of try to have like 2 weeks of stock. But they say, no, I'm not going to take any chance, okay? I'm going to get for 1 month of stock. So suddenly, okay, they're adding 14 more days of demand that many people will do, and all this creates a huge peak of demand. So the shelves everywhere go down, okay? We're in big trouble, okay, what's happening there. So the sales, okay, you see the overall sales, okay, they will not increase that much because there's no extra demand, but there's a lot of fluctuation there. Production has to ramp up a little bit. The capacity was like at 1.2 million. Then, since there was an increase in consumption, so some reacted, they climbed it to 130,000, and then after a while, okay, they got it to 170. 1.7 million a day, so they're capable of capturing. So at one point, the clients, okay, the people in the society, they begin to get back confidence and trust into the supply chain, and now they say, okay, I don't need to order that much of it, so let me slow down. So what's happening when it slows down? Now they're reducing their stock, okay? So in fact, there's no demand in the store. So the stores got themselves full, and suddenly, bang, there's nothing demanded, so it stays there. So it's going to be fluctuating. So these kind of phenomenon happen all the time, and my example here is a simple one, okay? There are many type of nuances that make this very complex to analyze, okay? But that's real life, or near real life. Now, so I gave you some basics. So what I want to put attention now is that people think that the pandemic is really the time that where you do a lot of the things related to supply chain in wider scale. Well, in fact, you were defining 5 states of the world, okay? There's the healthy state. That's when basically there's no pandemic. So it's not meaning that everybody is healthy, okay? Yes, there are illnesses, chronic diseases, there's some endemics, okay, that are located, but it's like business as usual for the world, okay, in there. And then suddenly, there's a little outbreak, okay? So in our case, it happened November, December, okay, in China, and it very located in one city, okay, and even before that was one zone in one city. But then at one point, there's a signal, okay? The faster that this signal can go out, it's not that there's going to be a pandemic. There's the potential of a pandemic. So already signals should be out, and the supply chain should not panic, but should say, oh, listen, we have to follow this carefully because there might be things. So as we move forward, it's not anymore an outbreak. It has transformed into an epidemic, okay? Now there are regions, it's getting to a few countries, and we begin to learn what this is all about. Now, I mean, it's not a pandemic, but it's growing, and through the week it's getting more. So those are very, very important times, okay, for the supply chains serving each country and each region in the world, because that's where you should get ready and begin to take actions to position and say, hey, if this is coming, are we going to be ready with the right set of things that are happening? And we learn, okay, from what's happening in the field at those regions that are not that unfortunately are suffering already from this disease, okay? And then we get into the pandemic, and now that's where, hey, the full world is in trouble. Each country, each region tries to protect somehow as best as possible its population, its industry, etc. So they're working, so they make all kind of compromise, and now there are a lot of people that get sick, and there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of turmoil. So that's a big deal, okay? And then this moves, and at one point, the number of new cases gets down a bit, and then we get into what we call the recovery state, okay? Now, in the recovery state, it's not that it's over. It's just that there's less, but there can be rebound. There are all kinds of things. So, but this is going to take a long time. And essentially, that phase has also different type of requirements, okay? The demand is different. Like, for example, at Georgia Tech, we're gonna be reopening for the researchers this summer. Now we have to make sure that the Georgia Tech Institute is ready to receive them in a very cautious way so that they're going to be well served. So that's basically what's happening with at the recovery state. Now, in fact, when we try to work, okay, more for those who are more like in supply chain, basically we're trying generally to get robustness, making sure that our supply chain is solid. But then there's big event, it goes down, performance goes down. So now we are testing the resilience. How good are we capable? Are we going to be able to get back on track and be able to provide things? And essentially, what's happening after that is if we're fragile, then we will not be able to get back to the level that we're aspiring. And if we are anti-fragile, this is the inverse, we learn from it and we get to a new normal eventually that's going to be better than what we have. So those are our basics there. So what will be happening from a supply chain perspective? Okay, what is causing trouble? Okay, well, in fact, if I simplify again, okay, there are kind of 3 basic causes that just have cascading effect and are creating issue. First, okay, are the inability to scale enough to meet demand, okay? I gave you the example, okay, about the vaccine and the test units, etc. So those are climbing. Like just the test, okay? As of now, or nearly now, okay, we have tested in the US, okay, 0.14% of the population. Okay, that's very, very tiny. Okay, why? It's simple. We don't have enough tests. And remember something, you should not be tested once, because you can be tested and 2 hours later you're in contact with somebody, there's something special, and now you've been affected. So you should be tested at regular interval when you've been at risk. So, but we're stuck out of that, okay? Then the other part is that we've got the workforce. We're in a factory or a warehouse, wherever, okay? And some people get affected, and then there's contagion, and suddenly you end up with a significant number of your people that are sick, and this affects your capacity to produce, and so you can end up closing plants. So with the porks, the meats, right now this has been happening, and it has had big impact. Like in Canada, there was a plant that was one of the two major plants, and it had to close, and it was one of the two that were serving 70% of the beef meat across Canada. There's also a lot of measures that are blocking the flow of workforce, the flow of goods, etc., that are affecting. So those three are at the core of what's happening. Now, I won't get into the details of what's going to be following. I just want to give you the gist of it here. So the first thing is we talk about workforce. This is pandemic, okay? So keeping an healthy, critical, and essential supply chain workforce is hugely important, okay, there. So there are basically three threads in there. First is keep your workers healthy. So there's a lot of things that are discussed online, all kind of meetings, etc. I just list out a bunch of there, but that is hugely important. This is no joke, okay, in there. Then the other part is that's more like on the readiness level, but trying to be able to work with less workers. You may not be perfect, but if you can exploit more automation, robotization, augmented reality, a lot of digital work, etc., that can help. And then there's the third phase, which is basically to say that can we develop and leverage a LT reserve set of workers. So that's a bit like reserve in the army, whatever, but it can be generated much more. Eventually across the planet, everybody should be registered. We should know like the skills, etc. And if there's a pandemic and their job is classified as non-essential, non-critical, then essentially what can you do to help? And so they could be in a matching pool optimization so that we can easily get them to adding value to society if they're okay to do it. Another very important aspect is in supply chain, the hard part of this that is really moving, dealing with the object is all the realm of logistics, okay? There's a lot of people involved dealing from customers all the way to suppliers and transporters into this, etc. You got a lot of people, and also these streets with millions and millions of goods that have been touched by many people, etc. So the potential for contamination is huge. So, and essentially what we should be trying to get toward is what we call vector-free logistics. So in fact, the idea is that try to make sure that the logistics system that's being used, okay, will decontaminate the stuff, the products, will protect the guys, will put the goods into containers that are going to be sealed and going to be make sure that we're protecting interaction with the customers, etc., and use the autonomous transport drones or whatever as needed and as pertinent, and try to do this in a very interconnected way, a smart way to do this using digitalization, so that essentially this can be running smooth without putting in danger the people that work in there, but also the clients, the citizens, and the supplier who's also citizens in there. Transportation, I will not have a lot of time, so I'll just say that like some key aspects here is there are two major challenges. Okay, so first, okay, it's like the rest of the supply chain. Okay, it will have to operate with reduced capacity. Here, it's in terms of vehicles and also the hubs where they do the transshipment. and the transportation has to adjust and handle huge changes in fluctuation in demand, like I've explained for the rest, but transport is living this a lot. On 3 level, the short haul and last mile, like there's been many people are now going much more purchases online, which are delivered to their home or to a smart locker or something, that the load that has caused is huge at a time where the driver capacity was limited, but now there's new people getting into it. So the game is changing radically in there. Long haul is also changing because we've got crippling capacity, and so the idea oftentimes is to try to get like a pandemic or critical type of lanes and hubs and make sure that those will be steady, they'll be working, they'll be processing through this. International transport is hugely important. There's almost no country in the world now that can operate well without international transport for a few weeks, okay, beyond a few weeks. After that, things degrade. So you have to make sure that all this works as nicely as possible. Now, something that is kind of surprising for those who are not really in the field, okay, that in 2020 we would not know how many masks are available across the country in every region by every supplier, being able to match this with the demand, etc. So, but that's the sad reality of it. So for the pandemic important products like the criticals and the essentials, what we're telling is that we should have visibility. I say broad scope so that we have all the players, even potential players, because we can repurpose companies and plants and so on. Large scale, because it's not just here in Atlanta, for example, it's Georgia, it's the U.S., it's North America, it's the world. Okay, that is a fact that we can help each other on these stuff. The visibility, getting up the supply chain, do prediction, and be able to do prediction and prescription capabilities. Now, technically, and I'm showing you a screenshot here, okay, a composite of screenshots, okay, show that technically it's not something that's impossible to do. Technically, it's very easy to do. The notion is everything else that has been around, and I've listed a few that are there, like confidentiality, competitiveness, competitive protectionism, okay, and so on and so forth, okay, that have to be dealt with. But essentially, this is beyond a single company. There are lives at stake and many lives at stake. So this is the stuff that we should have had. But the trouble is that you cannot snap your fingers and say, hey, man, I want visibility, okay, get it to me. Yeah. So the example I'm throwing come from Austria, and they have been working at preparing for this for 2-3 years now. And when it came in, now they could activate because they already had thousands of companies and players of facilities that were already willing to get in there at a lower pace, but now they just accelerated. Now, sadly, what's happening is that I told you demand is fluctuating a lot. There's increase in there. So there are times where we have to be careful that because there's more demand than supply. So typical methods, okay, that are done are like rationing and allocation. Rationing, telling you can buy only the 2. Allocation, I say I get to that retailer and I'm giving only that much given what he has. But this stuff is very standard, has been done for hundreds and thousands of years at some degree, but it has to be done very well over a territory encompassing multi-companies. It must ensure that it ensure transparent fairness and very efficient on this, and will account for the visibility that is there, which is not really done most of the time. So those are nice, look good, but they're not effectively very good. But there are also in 2020 and beyond, okay, a lot of potential. Our population is much smarter, well-educated, and equipped with digital technology. So there's a lot of things that we can do to help. So, for example, companies, retailers, and so on can provide supply chain visibility to the population, telling them how much they've got, okay, for how much week they think that they're okay beyond what they're going to be trouble, and so on. So this is stuff that is feasible. May not be on everything, but on many it could be wisely feasible. exploiting inventory management tools at household, managing how much you've got of each of your food and all your consumables and all that, so that you don't end up panicking and buying for 2 years because you just didn't compute your consumption, okay? So this would help quite a lot. And also having all kind of stimulating incentives, like for people to do at home some products instead of buying them already done. Simple one is like in food, okay? When you do recipes online and you learn to cook better, you just take the components, the materials, okay, the meat, the vegetable, etc., and you create your own things, okay? Now, if I'm trying to put a wider picture into this, okay, in fact, right now we hear a lot, there are debates going on, okay, and in fact, it's about like autonomy versus availability, okay, so should we, for example, try to get everything regionalized and have our supply chains back home and just for us and reserve our capacity completely for us and make sure that we've got all the essentials, all the criticals with the right capacity, etc.? The trouble is that it's very hard to achieve because that's a lot of investment, a lot of cost, operating cost for something that may or may not happen in next year, in 5 years, in 10 years. So this is very tough to achieve, okay? On the other side, okay, is the more like interconnected approach, okay, which is basically to say that what I must try to do is guarantee that I've got available what I'm going to need, okay? But now exploiting as much as possible all the reliable certified sources across the world, okay, in my place, but also elsewhere. So this notion of being more interconnected, that will be playing more the global game, okay, is like the other extreme. Well, our logic tells us that essentially it's neither or, okay, so it's not like the one or the other, but more like a smart balance between those two, between autonomy and availability. So I've tried to give you like a very thorough, not thorough, but a high-level overview of what we've been doing. Clearly, I've just covered like maybe 5-10% of what we're dealing right now along those lines. But I hope that it's been enough to give you a feeling, a flair of what this is all about. Thank you very much. I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Benoit. That was great, very informative. Folks, I think I've known Benoit for about 5 years or so now, and he's always an encyclopedia of information, so there's always lots of stuff to learn when I talk to him or see one of his presentations. I see one question so far in the chat box, but we'd love to see more, but we will start with this one. Dr. Montreuil, can you further discuss vector-free logistics regarding modular containerization and robotics and autonomous transport?
Yeah, let me go back to that slide, okay. So the concept of vector-free, okay, so people have been talking recently about touchless logistics. Well, I think touchless is interesting. This means you try to have no human touching it, essentially, through the full process, okay, that is going on from receiving the goods, okay, whatever level, getting them through the world and getting them to your door. So, but vector-free, what basically what we're trying to do is say that it is possible, given all the technologies and the rigor and the systems that we have and the smartness, to make it that the probability that we would be transmitting the contagion through the logistics system would be as minimized as possible. So basically, the kind of the items that we have in there say, basically we say, we receive like, if you're like an Amazon or another, you receive like literally hundreds of thousands of different products from these numbers of suppliers. So you cannot know, okay, ahead of time, okay, which one have been contaminated or not, etc. So you need to make sure that if you want to be there, is that either you're going to decontaminate them, okay, or put them into something and then you're going to wash your hands, okay, and say, that's not my part, okay, in there. But essentially for us, it'd be, listen, normally the person that has shipped you, if we do vectorless logistics, should also have proven that it has done its job. So if it has done its job, then we would not have to decontaminate. So, but that starts there. We need to make sure that we're protecting the worker, because essentially at some point they may be touching things that could be contaminated. We want to avoid that as much as possible. We see modular containerization because essentially the idea here would be to standardize, to have very easy type of containers for packaging and handling and transportation, okay, that we can embed the products in there, make sure that they're closed, they're sealed, so nobody, okay, we can trace when we did this, okay, and telling that, listen, that's been done state of the art, okay, the protocol, everything's been respected, and since then it's never been opened. So the only thing that you have to be careful is the outside of the container, because it has been along the air, but everything that is in there is correct. So now this means that at the next step, if I'm making sure that I decontaminate the exterior, the interior is protected, so we can keep on doing. So the logistics becomes like moving containers, reshuffling containers, buffering containers, but the products themselves, they're protected. We talk about robotization, automation, okay, because essentially the idea here is that, well, in today's world, okay, you have to, if you look any time on the web, okay, you see examples of companies getting with drone operations, okay. In the US, there's a new one that popped up this week, okay. There are many, it's all around the world. There's so many companies in there. So there's technology pull that is there and push. And on the same time, you have on many facilities now, there's new generation of facilities that are put that make it so that we could do two things. First, in some setting, some dull job, etc., could be replaced by robots at one point. And others where it's a bit more complex, there's a lot of issues that the human needs to be there, then we can have a collaborative robots nearby. So the robot is going to be near the person, but the person can be socially distanced from the other ones, okay, in there. So that's for the delivery, the things, autonomous transport. I just showed an example, okay, by JD.com in China, my little picture from there, where you see a physician that is taking an order that he's called, and that little vehicle brought it, and there's been no touch anywhere, and he's really interacting with it, and he's going to give it his things in there. So that's working right now, okay, in there. So I hope and then touchless operation, essentially, why I mentioned this, it was basically that there needs to be processes, protocols well done, okay, how you do this correctly so that you're going to be respecting this. Digitalization is the more we can do digitalize and not force you to write things or press your finger every places, that's going to be winning a lot. Customer collaboration, because the people that are receiving this, if they play the game correctly, okay, they can help tremendously along those lines. And the one in the middle is physical internet. But if I begin to talk about this too much right now, I'm going to be gone for an hour. But the idea is that there's this new hyper-connected logistics system that we've been conceptualized and working on and beginning to implement across the world that has all the building blocks to be able to support such a thing in there. So I hope I answered your question correctly.
Yeah, that all sounded good to me, and I'll say that the next question in the chat box is kind of almost leading you into the physical internet discussion. But so I'll say,
that's okay with me.
It's maybe the short version of that. But do you feel that in the future a fully automated urban delivery system will exist? And if so, what are the missing components which need to be created?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Okay,
that's a whole presentation, probably. But
yeah. I would need a full presentation on it. But let me give some of the key ideas. Okay, first, technologically, there are challenges, okay? Because especially when you get into older types of cities, okay, just climbing stairs, going the road, there are all kind of technical issues related to this, okay? Pizza bots, okay, getting stolen by people that just wanted a pizza, and all kind of crazy little stuff there, okay? But this said, technologically, there's not much, okay, that is forbidding this dream to happen, okay? It's a feasible dream, okay? Is it a worthwhile dream? That is a different thing, okay? Should there be nobody, everything automated? It's possible. If it's a brand new city, we could design the city, okay, so that there's be no need for anybody doing manual logistics. That would all be done automatically. The trouble is that we're living with real buildings, real infrastructure, so that is not that obvious. The other issue that we have is that for this to happen, there's going to be an interplay between the cities and the government, the authorities on one side, and then the companies that are playing in that cities, okay? And those companies will be on one side the retailer, on the other side all the vendors, and in the middle all the logistics, transportation service providers. So that's a bunch of companies, okay, in there. And if you want this to have something well done, automated, we should have like a shared infrastructure. Otherwise, we're going to doubling, tripling, multiply by 10 the kind of infrastructure that we would need to be putting in place. So we should have like little hubs, okay, that can be shared by many players, okay, that use the same protocol, same interface, etc. So that could work. Or micro-fulfillment centers, again, that could be deployed, that you would pay for usage, etc. So all these, okay, are feasible and could lead to it. So there are big parts of that I like very much. Do I want absolutely not to have anybody? That I'm not sure. Okay, so this gives good jobs to people, interaction with people. Talking to a robot is not very interesting as compared to talking with somebody who's got a good head on his or shoulder. So I'm not convinced on that part, and it depends really where you are in the world. Okay, but honestly, I think having something that would be prone, a system be standardized, that would have a lot of what we're talking there, that's feasible. Now, there's one place, though, where I want it, and I want it dramatically, okay? I told you about, like, the outbreak state, okay? When there's a city, there's a place in the world, okay, that they're stuck with an outbreak and it gets dangerous, okay? Well, normally we should be able, within 24 hours maximum, okay, to be able to deploy an automated, vector-free logistics system that will take charge of the logistics in that city to make sure that we're not gonna create more propagation of the disease, and at the same time, the people that are going to be in there, besides the fact that they're going to be stuck at home, okay, are normally not supposed to have anything big as impact on their life. That I want very fast.
Right. And there was actually a comment in the chat box related to that, to your response here, or to that question really, about FAA to reduce regulations for starters would help, and I'm guessing that's related to drone delivery as well, which is another way to do things a little bit, generally touchless. But of course, I know we've seen that happening a little more in, Africa with test cases and other locations where the regulations aren't as high, and you have a lot more rural area outside of some of the major cities, delivering drugs and vaccines and so forth like that. Folks, again, feel free to type your questions in the chat box. Not seeing any others, I'm going to chime in with one of my own. Benoit, I was on a different webinar a couple of days ago that I saw somebody presenting, because we all are on lots of webinars these days. Mm-hmm. Yep. And one of the concepts that came up, this was on economic development and economic impacts, and the question that came up was the idea of restaurants as the general store, that some restaurants, they've gone to takeout only, and they've started selling other goods, toilet paper, mm-hmm. popular, cleaning supplies, things like that. So my question is, how do you set up a supply chain for something like that that's not going to be permanent, but will help meet a spike in demand, and particularly might be helpful for people in those neighborhoods? Maybe they don't have a car, maybe they don't want to get on transit, or transit may not be available anymore. MARTA obviously reduced bus routes, but is helping to bring revenue into those restaurants when they have less, but also is helping to serve that community and the people living there But at the same time, creating a supply chain for something that's so temporary like that is probably a major challenge. So I was curious if you had any thoughts on how to do that.
Well, this is the kind of thing that I like very much, okay, by the way, okay, so, because in my ways, you see all those restaurants that are closed, okay, some of them are capable of doing some catering and some delivery, some call online and will go curbside, etc. But clearly they don't have the kind of revenues that they were used to, and there are other needs. So if they're smart and can find, okay, the things that need to be done, and that with their facility, because it's a facility, okay, they can do better in the staff that they have, okay, if they can use that staff to do good in other ways, okay, that's what we call repurposing, okay, essentially, okay. So I didn't have time to go through in all details today on this, but that's a big part of the game. So now what we must make sure is that we're able to make this happen. Now, there are several trouble, okay, but if I talk about it like logistically, it's quite feasible as the minute that you're connected, okay, with the right suppliers, the right delivery persons, etc. So that should not be a big issue. Where it gets a bit tougher is making sure that they can connect to the right vendors, the right suppliers, okay, and find a way for them to be able to sell to you, okay? And some of them, they're used to sell 1 million at a time, and you come in and you want 25, okay? So those guys are not really ready to do this. But there are many others that could well do it, okay, in there. So I think we need, their notions of digital platforms will help into this. This is clear. Also, a lot of notions of shared facilities, okay, so that basically this can be channeled to other places. So if we can make it so that the feeding of those restaurants, okay, is just business as usual. It's just another address, and it's just the same darn way, same type of mother container, and get it there. It's transparent. So at one point, in the kind of things that we're working on, okay, this should not even be a question. Okay, this should be like yeah, just go and do it. Okay, if you've got a market, okay, that's fine. Okay, so this is not science, rocket science. Okay, this is very basic stuff, but it's very troubling because the world has been built on steady state, on things that are very, very static and signed for a year, 3 years, whatever, and then you come in with these punctual, these pop-up stores, all kind of variants of this, and the world likes this, but the ones are dominating the scene, they don't like it that much yet.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a change for those bigger suppliers, certainly. I got a couple comments there in the chat box. One example of something like this happening in Boston, launching a grocery store outpost to help restaurants, and certainly we've seen it at a couple locations here in Atlanta. Some other thoughts on training for farmers. One last question in the chat box, which again could probably be a whole thesis in its own right, but I'll give you the 2-minute version if you can, so we can try to wrap up on time. The question here is, if an automated delivery system existed, could it actually enable people to create things at their homes and employ the system to bring the needed supplies to their home and have a way to reliably, securely at a low cost ship the items to others?
Definitely. There's absolutely no constraints for doing this. Okay, I think that'd be smart, and I think that if you look at the kind of technology that is popping up, okay, with all the 3D printing and all those variants of this, okay, this is going to be happening. Okay, so your creativity, okay, can be put to work. Okay, and at one point you'll get the materials, get the right components. And what we're fighting is right now, you try to get the components, but they'll say, okay, I'm going to ship you a truckload. You don't want a truckload, you want the equivalent of a carton, okay, in there. So, but that is something they're not good at doing. So if we can make it so that we can get you like this carton roughly at the same kind of price level as you would have having ordered a full truckload, then we begin to be in good shape to deal with what you're mentioning. But I welcome that. I think this is very, very interesting. Okay, so who's going to be a consumer? Who's going to be the producer? That's going to be more and more fuzzy. Okay, and we can definitely accommodate this. But I think there are already a lot of things that are available, okay, that make this possible. The trouble is that not all the people know about it, okay, so know what's feasible. And even those who know, there are still parts that are not as seamless as should be to enable this. So instead of making this like something hidden, okay, very complex, and you need to talk to me and I'm going to charge you big bucks to tell you, it should be in many ways so simple to do, okay, there. And then concentrate on adding your value. So I like this question. It's because I think it's very important. And also, as we have many people working and living at home right now, okay, they've got a lot of time to think about the crazy ideas, and some are going to be things that we're going to all exploit and leverage later on. So I'm welcoming that very much, and we should, as a collective, try to encourage this to happen.
Yes, that's great, and I think the big, it seems like with both of those last two questions, the biggest challenge, both for home production as well as restaurants selling other goods, is just that small scale delivery rather than getting, as you said, a truckload of getting something that's more size appropriate for that location. So similar challenge.
The tracking, the purchasing, all the facets, okay, but telling that you should make it easy for somebody who's going to do it at this micro level, okay, to do it sweetly and not disturbing everybody else. He's contributing to the overall flow. Okay, he's not generating 1 million, he's generating 10. Okay, but 10 times 100,000, that's 1 million. Okay, so you get the same kind of critical mass, but from a different perspective. And if you can adjust it and take it then you get there. Remember, okay, the U.S. Postal Service, okay, and the Postal Service everywhere, they were the biggest logistics operations in most of the countries for decades and decades and decades. And basically, it was just 50 cents, even 5 cents envelopes, okay, in little packages, but they just got them from everywhere and got this night. So we need to get back to this way. I'm not telling to get back the old way it was operated, but to this philosophy of thinking, and I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, like what you said there, make it easy. That's a good approach.
Make it easy.
Deborah, don't know if you want to wrap things up for us here?
Yes, thank you so much, Benoit and Daniel, for this really fascinating discussion. And thank you to everyone who joined us virtually for adding an extra layer of content and feedback. We had a very dynamic discussion on our chat box too. So thank you. Stay tuned for next Thursday, where we're going to talk about connectivity. The slides and recording of this webinar will be obviously uploaded and distributed afterwards. So thank you again, and thank you, Benoit and Daniel.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Take care.